Architectural Outcast.
Welcome to the Architectural Outcast, the channel that helps y'all learn to think like an architect. I'm Randy. We've just come off the holiday season, time of family and giving and joy, but also a time of appreciation and remembrance. This is a time that I like to take a moment to reflect and think about those who've fallen along the way over the years, people that I've lost. So I want to take this opportunity to tell you all about a very special person, somebody I had the privilege of knowing for all too short a time, Mr. Kim, my father-in-law. At this point, some of y'all are probably asking, why are you telling us about your father-in-law? I thought this channel was about thinking like an architect, architecture stuff. What's he have to do with anything? Well, one, I just like talking about my father-in-law, so there's that. And two, I'm always going on about thinking like an architect means you're willing to reject the premise of the question, ask your own questions, and seek your own answers. Sounds pretty easy, right? The hard part is, are we willing to reject the premise of our own question, challenge our own assumptions? And sometimes lessons come from some of the most unexpected places. In my case, from my father-in-law. His experience, I think, is well worth sharing. In the fall of 2006, I was so excited. I had been accepted into a PhD program in architecture. I had moved to a new city and a part of the country I'd never been before. I was completely focused on my studies. I didn't plan on doing any dating. Oh, what a foolish child. I hadn't been in town a week. The first day of my first class, one of those long seminar classes, we were having a break. Everybody was standing around chatting, exchanging names, getting to know each other. I made a stupid joke. Nobody laughed but one cute girl. Just so happened, the next class period, we were assigned to the same team for our class project. A couple days later was the first time she showed up in our office. I shared an office with the other first-year PhD students. There were 5 of us. We were a pretty big group. Normally, they only accepted 1 or 2 students each year. Our group became rather infamous within the department. A lot of professors were scared of us. We became very close, very tight. You messed with one of us, you messed with all of us. We hung out together and we socialized together. If you saw one of us, more than likely, you'd see the other 4 somewhere around close by. It wasn't long before the 5 became known as the 6. The department had gained an extra first-year student, well, at least unofficially. Where we went, she went. And in particular, she and I had become inseparable. We had become best friends. She was so accepted by the department that they just started automatically inviting her to functions that the PhD students were expected to attend. That caused all sorts of confused conversations. You'd have some VIP or guest come up to her. "Hello, young lady. And what is your area of research?" And you'd have some professor come running over. "Oh, no. She's not one of our PhD students. She's a master's student." "Oh, what studio are you in?" "She's not in the architecture program. She's in the medical science department." "What's she doing here then?" "Oh, she works with the first-year students." "Oh, okay." As the semester started to wind down, the first-year students decided we really wanted to celebrate Thanksgiving, have a big party. And our unofficial 6th member, she offered to host. She offered to provide her apartment as a place for the party. After the party was over and everybody else had left, I asked her if she wanted to go out on a date. Turns out the joke was on me. Everybody else already assumed we were dating. I just hadn't realized it yet. It was just before Christmas that my now girlfriend decided she needed to call her parents and let them know she now had a boyfriend. But when she called home, she got her mother. Her father wasn't there. We learned later why. Her mother was genuinely very supportive, very encouraging and positive. congratulated her daughter, and was very happy. And she reassured her daughter, "Don't worry, I'll tell your dad when he gets home, and he will call you as soon as he can." We were at the bus stop of all places a couple days later when he returned her call. Their conversation was very short. He said, "You date an American and I will disown you," and then hung up. You see, my girlfriend, she was born in Seoul. She's Korean. And clearly her father was not happy that she was dating a non-Korean. Later, I learned his reasoning, why he said what he said. But at the time, I didn't even know what was said. They spoke in Korean, a language I don't speak. All I knew, I now had an uncontrollably sobbing woman in my arms, and the people around me were giving me some really funky looks. Fortunately, just a couple minutes later, she got another phone call. Now, I will admit, it did seem like hours. It was her mother, and their conversation was equally short. Her mother said, "Your father's acting like an idiot. Don't worry, I will take care of this." Let me give you all a little free piece of advice. Don't piss off a Korean mother. That evening, I took my girlfriend out to dinner. This was a couple hours after the incident. I'd had time to calm down, get over the emotional reaction to what he had said. Time to think. Years before, I'd lost my relationship with my father. I knew how difficult it had been for me to get over that. To this day, sometimes my heart still aches, realizing I can never have that back again. I did not want her to go through that. I didn't want her to experience it. So I told her, if push comes to shove, it comes down to between him or me, she should choose him. Now, what was her reaction to my grand gesture, my great noble sacrifice? She laughed and shrugged. She's like, "Nah, he's not going to disown me." What? She's like, "Mom won't allow it." Another free piece of advice. Don't piss off a Korean mother. She did admit, though, she was worried about how it would affect their relationship going forward. But that's kind of where we left it, waiting for him to call back. It was sometime around the end of January, 1st of February, before we heard from him again. My girlfriend was in the office with us, as usual, when she got the phone call. Everybody knew what was going on, so we all packed our bags and very quickly left to give her privacy. This conversation was almost as short as the first one, but it was also the first time I got a glimpse of what an amazing man my future father-in-law was. Because the first thing he did is he begged his daughter for her forgiveness, and he apologized for everything that he said, and he told her that all he cared about is that he found somebody that made her happy and somebody who would treat her right. Regardless of that, he would support her decision 100%. And then he had to go because he had an appointment. My first reaction on hearing this news was, what the hell? I mean, I've studied psychology. I know human beings don't go from one extreme to the other in that short a time period. Clearly, I was missing out on some key piece of information, or I wasn't understanding what was going on to begin with. Turns out, I was right on both accounts. A couple days later, she received a phone call again from both her parents. Her older brother was on the line as well. Turns out, that previous month, why he was so slow to respond wasn't because his intense anger, because he had a lot on his plate. That day when she called to tell her parents that she had a boyfriend and her father wasn't there, because he was out getting a second opinion. And that month, he was going through a whole series of tests. They confirmed it. They were all calling to tell her he'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. And the doctors had told them that he had less than 6 months to live. And that was with starting treatment immediately. He had decided that he wasn't going to do chemo. As short a time as he was told he had left, he didn't want to spend it dealing with the miseries of radiation treatments. He was going to do traditional Korean medicine instead. So my girlfriend and I's relationship was on hold for a while, rightfully so, because she had to focus on her family and her father. He sold his business and put his affairs in order, and then he started his treatments. And man, oh man, did he respond well. 6 months came and went. He was still going strong. In fact, he was starting to put on weight. Within a year, his gray hair was starting to noticeably turn black again. And then the doctors announced his cancer was in remission. And within a couple of years, they couldn't find any cancer in his body. After that first 6 months came and went, and her father was clearly responding well to his treatments, we decided again to start focusing on our relationship. It wasn't too long before I realized maybe I wanted to marry this girl. So I proposed. But life again reared its ugly head. My brother and my grandmother passed away within months of each other. Now, Korean culture, you don't marry too close to the death of a close family member. So again, we had to kind of put things on hold. The way I was raised, you look your father-in-law straight in the eye when you ask permission to marry his daughter. So when my fiance told me it was back on again, we headed off to Korea to meet her parents. Now, I'm not going to lie. I was incredibly nervous going over to Korea. I'd gotten to know her family over the previous several years through phone calls during Christmas and New Year's and other holidays and events. And I saw that her family was very close. They loved each other very much. And they had been very kind and welcoming to me. Her father, no different. He'd been supportive and friendly. But first impressions are lasting impressions. And I still had in the back of my mind his first gut reaction when he learned that I was dating his daughter. I was worried. Was he putting on a brave face for the sake of his daughter? But in reality, he had no use for me. Anybody who has ever flown to Korea from the States knows what a miserable 17 or 18 hours that can be. I didn't sleep very well in that crowded tube over the Pacific Ocean, so I wasn't in my best shape when we got to Korea. And then we had to spend 2 or 3 hours navigating public transportation to get to our parents' apartment building. But when we got off the elevator, I was greeted by a massive mural that surrounded the door of the apartment and was out into the hallway. My future brother-in-law's wife, she's an artist, she'd painted it. It said, "Welcome home, daughter and Randy. Welcome." Apparently, my in-laws were super proud and wanted everybody in the neighborhood to know that their daughter was coming home from America and she was bringing a son-in-law with her. Within minutes, I was being surrounded by all sorts of new relatives. Handshakes and hugs, kind of overwhelming. The next morning when I came out, I saw my father-in-law sitting at a floor table in the living room. But before I could join him, I was dragged into the kitchen to the kitchen table by my mother-in-law. She and my wife had spent all morning cooking breakfast, a massive feast. I'm sitting there trying to be polite as my mother-in-law is shoveling more food on my plate, and apparently the only English she could say was, "Eat more." Yes, ma'am. At some point, I hear my father-in-law say, "Uh-huh," and my mother-in-law say, "Rah." I turn to my wife, who starts laughing hysterically. When she calmed down, she said, "My dad just said, 'I'm hungry too. I'd like to eat breakfast.'" And my mother-in-law said, "Be quiet. Wait your turn. I'm feeding our son-in-law." And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm just digging it deeper between the two of us. Next couple days, my wife dragged me all over Korea, sightseeing, and more importantly, meeting her relatives and friends. All of her friends. Elementary school friends, high school friends, college friends, former colleagues, coworkers. But eventually, there came that moment. My wife and mother-in-law went out shopping together to give me and my father-in-law some time alone to talk. So we're sitting there, and I start to break the ice. "Well, sir, well, sir, I'd like to talk to you about something." And he stopped me. He was like, before we have this conversation, I need to explain myself and apologize. And that's when I came to fully realize how privileged I was to get to know such a special person. My father-in-law was born right after the war. He had a pretty large family, and they ran a small grocery store in a village just outside of Seoul. Because they were close to the 38th parallel, their store was destroyed and burnt, looted, when the North Koreans came invading down. And then, when they came back through, they burnt and looted and killed what they'd missed the first time around. So his family had to start from almost zero, built back up their store as he was growing up. By the time he got out of the military and started his family in the early 70s, the economy in Korea wasn't doing well. So he made the hard decision. He would go overseas for a couple years. He could earn more money, but at the cost that he would miss out on his children growing up. He wouldn't see them, see their first steps, their first words. But he was able to raise enough money that when he came back, he was able to start his own business, start from the ground up. As I said earlier, he dearly loved his family. His family was very close to each other. And my wife tells the story all the time. Korea is a drinking culture. You're expected to go out drinking after work with your colleagues. It's no different when you're trying to start and run a business. Potential clients, coworkers, the whole 9 yards, you're expected to go out and drink late into the night. My wife can remember every night when he would come home, he would insist on coming in and giving his daughter and his son a kiss goodnight. To this day, my wife still doesn't like the smell of alcohol breath, unless she's been drinking. Funny how that works. My father-in-law's world revolved around his children. His dream was to spend his golden years with his children nearby. He envisioned Sunday dinners with a house full of grandkids. He was under the impression that his daughter was going off to America for only 2 years. She'd get her master's and then come back and settle down nearby and start bringing grandkids over. So when he learned that she was dating an American, that dream was going up in smoke. My father-in-law realized that if his daughter married an American, there were 2 likely outcomes. 1, she'd want to stay in America. There went the Sunday dinners with the grandkids. Or 2, Korea's 98% homogenous. A large section of the population goes their entire life without ever personally meeting a foreigner. Some sections of the culture really frown upon interracial dating. There have been a number of high-profile incidents over the years. We had our own incident while we were there. To this day, my wife doesn't realize the extent and how things almost went. I choose to focus on the really positive aspect of it. It was shut down by other Koreans, strangers who are like, this ain't happening here. Not now, and not with these people. It's been my experience. The majority of Koreans are awesome. But I digress. My father-in-law's real concern were the grandkids. Korea can be hard on mixed-race children. They oftentimes struggle growing up, have a hard time fitting in, end up living between cultures. He didn't want his grandchildren to go through that, so he would have recommended that his daughter stay in America, raise his grandchildren in the States. But then there goes Sunday dinner with the grandkids. He was not a happy camper. His issues with his daughter and her decision were the backdrop to him coming to terms with being told he had pancreatic cancer and only 6 months to live. After he sold his business and started his treatment, he started walking up a nearby mountain every single day. It was part of his treatment. Keep active both mentally and physically, and to push his body to its limits as much as possible. One day he was coming back down that mountain when he stopped in the church to pray. Now, under those circumstances, what would you pray for? This is where I gained immense respect for my father-in-law. He didn't whine and complain, why me, and he didn't try to bargain. God, if you take cancer from me, I will do whatever. Instead, he got down on his knees and he begged for the courage and strength to face whatever challenge he needed to face. He then got up and walked out of the church. He went over to a nearby bench to sit down and think. And that's where he said he had a series of epiphanies, one right after another. He believed that God had answered his question. Your mileage may vary. But the first thing he realized, he was a dead man walking. He only had 6 months. Every single day past that was a gift, a grace. How was he going to spend those gifts? That was his choice. He told me that once he came to that realization, the very next thought that came into his mind was his daughter's face. And he started asking himself, if every single day is a gift, why am I wasting them fighting with my daughter? I'm being incredibly selfish. I'm not going to have the opportunity to have grandchildren come over for Sunday dinner, but I do have the opportunity to meet and get to know my son-in-law, to make sure, to be assured in my own mind that she's happy and going to be well cared for once I'm gone. Why am I wasting that opportunity? He said that his next realization was that his selfishness was allowing him to look the other way when it came to evil. My father-in-law was no racist. He loved Americans and American culture. One of his favorite pastimes was to watch either old westerns or American baseball on TV. In fact, he told me that when he was a little boy, his dream was to run off to Texas to become a cowboy. He would be so thrilled to know that his granddaughter's a Texan. Little boys are the same. But he was allowing racist and their attitudes and thoughts to affect his decision-making processes. And he assured me that he didn't care about whether his grandchildren would be of mixed race or not. All he cared was that they were happy and healthy and grew up in a good home. And then he used a term in Korean that I didn't understand. I checked with my wife later. When she got through laughing again, she told me it was the Korean equivalent of F racist. He then apologized for us getting off on the wrong foot, and he wanted to start over, make sure that everything was good going forward. Well, what am I going to say? So the only thing I could think to say was, well, sir, may I have your daughter in marriage? And of course, he said yes. Now we come to my favorite story of the visit, when I actually got to make a positive impression on him. He normally was very quiet. He would just sit back and watch the family as they carried on, not say a lot, but obviously observing. And he noticed that while we were doing a lot of sightseeing, I seemed to be particularly interested in architecture, Korean architecture. I wonder why. But one day we had day off. We weren't doing sightseeing. We were resting. We'd been crazy busy. And he said that he wanted to take me somewhere and show me something. So I was like, sure. This was after our talk. So, we're on good terms at this point. And so after lunch and everybody relaxed a little bit, he got up, told his daughter, let's go. So we take off and we walk through this little suburb of Seoul till we get to the edge of town. And we go into this little beautiful, little wooded, secluded spot. And I'm looking around and my wife tells me, this is a cemetery. My father-in-law wanted to show me a Korean cemetery. They're a little different than American cemeteries. Once I learned it's a cemetery, I have my head on the swivel. I'm looking around, clearly not paying any attention to anything he's saying. At one point, he stops talking and he turns to a daughter and asks her, what's wrong with him? She asked me, and I said, where I come from, when a father takes his daughter's boyfriend to a cemetery, that usually means he's not coming back. So I'm looking for open holes or a group of scary looking guys hanging around. Well, he stopped, and he does a double take, and he looked at me, and we made eye contact, and we just stared at each other for a few seconds. And suddenly he started laughing. He started laughing so hard at one point he was doubled over, had his hands on his knees. Finally calmed down. As he walked by me, he patted me on the shoulder and he said, "You're funny. I like you." All the way home, every so often he'd stop, he'd turn, he'd give me a look, and he'd start laughing again. And that became his favorite story about me. Every time we'd meet some of his friends or relatives, he'd always insist on telling that story. Apparently, it translates well into Korean humor. The last thing my father-in-law said to me as we headed out to catch the plane back to America: "Get this wedding done. Get it over with." Implication: we're on the clock. He doesn't have all day. I said, "Yes, sir." As soon as we get back to the States, we started planning our wedding. We ended up having two. One here in America, back in southern Missouri for my family, and then one back in Korea. And as we were planning for the Korean wedding, I said to my wife, "It's pretty clear your father's health is starting to fade again. Been a couple years. We got way more than 6 months. But he was getting older, and the fight had taken a lot out of him. It was clear he was starting to fade." And so I said, "We'll have lots of trips in the future, but we're not going to have a lot of time with your dad. We should invite your parents on our honeymoon with us." Actually made her cry. The first thing my brother-in-law did when we got to Korea was give me a huge hug. And he's not the huggy type. He told me, "You'll never know what this means to my parents, you inviting them on this trip. They are so happy." Like, what else could I do? We also got another surprise. We did a very traditional Korean wedding. At the end, my mother-in-law and father-in-law got up and they performed a song. She sang and he played the Korean drum. They were so happy that they wanted to be part of the celebration. And then we were off to our honeymoon. We went to Jeju Island, by the way. And we got there at the end of tourist season. Everything was still open, but there were no crowds. It was awesome. And we had such a good time. My in-laws insisted on staying at another hotel. They wanted to give us our privacy. And it got a little awkward because every night at dinner, my mother-in-law was insisting I eat large quantities of eel. You can guess what that's supposed to do. It's like, I get it. You want grandkids. And then we came home and life continued. Ups and downs, good and bad. Anybody who's married knows it's work. But one of our problems, we weren't having kids. Found out later why, but at the time, it was pretty clear this wasn't in the cards. We were starting to talk about adoption when we got a call from our parents again. Cancer was back, this time in his lungs and bones. They don't know if it was the same cancer that just moved or something completely different. But we knew that this time it was different. He was tired, taken a lot out of him the last fight, and he was older, was wore out. And he didn't take well to the treatments. They started to fade really fast. So by spring of 2018, she got a call from her brother, like, "You need to come home." Well, she'd saved up enough of her paid time off that she was able to take a whole month off. She flew back to Korea. My father-in-law handled his second bout with cancer with the same grace and dignity and courage that he handled the first bout. He was so happy at the end with all his family around him. And he kept telling everybody, "Don't be sad. I'm just graduating life." And he died peacefully in bed with all his family surrounding him. Before he passed, my wife told her dad that it looked like we weren't able to have kids, so we were thinking about adopting. He gave his full blessing, and he said, "Having children is important. Whether they're your own really doesn't matter." So when she came home, we sat down and had a long talk. His passing had caused us to reevaluate things, realize every single day is a blessing. So we need to get off our butts and make some changes. We weren't real happy with the situation we were in. So we decided to move to Texas. We put our house on the market, and she was in the process of looking for a job down here. And then one day she came home all excited. She was pregnant. Of course, the first thing we did was hot-footed over to the Lady Bits doctor, where she had all the exams, full prenatal. And the first thing the doctor said to her, you shouldn't be pregnant. All the problems we'd had trying to get pregnant in the past, there was good reason. In fact, my wife had a very difficult pregnancy. It was hard on her. But in the end, we had a very healthy little girl. My wife sincerely believes that our daughter was the last gift from her father. That somehow before he left this earth, he called in a favor or something, made sure that we had a little girl. Now you can scoff and laugh and say, that doesn't make sense, or that's stupid or silly. But I don't recommend you say that to my wife's face. Let me give you all a free piece of advice. Never piss off a Korean mother. We come back to the question that I raised at the beginning of this discussion. Are you able to challenge the premise of your own question? And what will you do when you challenge your own assumptions and you realize you done screwed up? Are you willing to look into your own soul when you realize that despite your best intentions, and you know what they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but at any rate, you realize that despite your best intentions, your actions are taking you somewhere really bad. And then, like Mr. Kim, once you realize that that's the case, do you have the courage to do something about it? In his case, go and immediately rectify his relationship with his daughter. Do whatever it took to preserve that, fix any damage that might have happened. And then go a step further. Fix a relationship that might have been damaged with a complete stranger. Admit all wrongdoing. Ask for forgiveness. As I said earlier, it was my honor and privilege to get to know Mr. Kim. And I feel fortunate for the time that we did have together. As we leave the holiday season and get back to the grind of daily life, never forget that every single day is a blessing and that we should treasure each other, people in our lives, as much as possible because we're all here far too short a time. At any rate, I hope I've given you all something to think about. And until next time, y'all be safe.
Please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment.